Okay, chapter 23, flexible budgets. The key, I think, is going to be the standard cost. Okay, so this is a sort of a management plan, or what you'll study in management. You know, you've got to develop some planned objectives, and that involves the budget. And then you compare actual results with budgeted, and then you analyze the differences. And that is called a variance report, and it's very standard. And then you take any corrective actions, or you might make some strategic actions, and then you revise and prepare a new budget. And this is sort of an ongoing process in the management process. So, with a fixed budget performance report, if units, here they have shown you an example of unit sales are higher, then we should expect costs to be higher. How much cost because of the higher sales? So you're going to get some what's called variance reports, like I said earlier, and you're going to compare each line item, and then that will become favorable or unfavorable based on what against budget. Unfavorable would be, greater expenses, or favorable would be lesser expenses or greater revenues. Purpose of flexible budgets. This is like for different production ranges and so forth, and it could be for different relevant ranges. It's also for a lot of times in performance evaluations. So these could be like different ranges of budgets, as an example. Again, you're still going to be dealing with variable costs and fixed costs. Okay, this does not ever change. So what you're going to be taking down is your variable costs are a constant on a unit basis, not on a total cost basis, but on a per unit. And so here's an example. If you got a sale, you're selling something for $10, and your variable cost you get down to the unit is $4.80. An example of variable costs would be like your raw materials. Let's say you're making soup, and so it's the same amount of ingredients in that can of soup every time. And so you get those costs down to, let's say, $4.80. And so then your contribution margin is $5.20. And these variable costs are not going to change as you produce more, because the carrots are still going to cost the same. It's just how many pounds are you buying, would be an example there. And so you're going to go through and look at your variety of line items, sales, variable costs, fixed costs, contribution margin, and you're going to develop variances, favorable, unfavorable, and so forth. Standard costs. This, sometimes students do struggle over this concept. So basically what a standard cost is a predetermined amount. And so you use this for instance, on making a sales estimate or a cost estimate, like maybe on a bid. If you're a contractor, you have to put a bid in of what the total costs will be. And you're going to have to live with that bid. But there are some things you never will know until after the fact. But so what you do is you try to develop a formula, and that is as accurate as possible. And it's based on predetermined amounts. It's just somewhat of a guess, but it's used with experience, and you can get other bids from other vendors and so forth. And this is used for benchmarks for measuring performance. So let's identify a standard cost. So you should use practical standards. You don't want to use absolutely the best or the worst. You want this to be functional, so it needs to be reasonable. So you don't want to use ideal standards, because ideals is theoretical. It's based on perfection, and most of us are not perfect. So standard costs. So you get two variables that you have to look at. One is the pricing, and the other one is quantity. And this will be true of all of your standard costs. And so in your direct materials, it would be what are you paying per pound, and then how many pounds, or if you're building a house, what's the price per pound of nails, and how many nails do you think you will use? Labor, you're going to set rates, standard. Again, it's a price. Maybe you're paying your labor $15 an hour. How many hours do you think they're going to work? So it's just another variation of quantity. Rate standards, again, how much is my utility rates? How much do you think you're going to use? So it always comes down to P times Q. They give you some examples, how much you're going to use at the price, and then it'll be a total, and this is what you're going to be adding up. So, but you have to estimate, again, how the price and the quantity you're going to be using. And this takes some experience and some industry standards, possibly. So then you're going to get back into cost variance, and the variance is unfavorable because the actual cost exceeded the standard cost, or it was maybe favorable because it was less than the standard cost. And then as time goes by, you'll be reevaluating those standard costs or your budgeted costs, always trying to improve that process to get as close to perfect as possible. Cost variance analysis, yeah, you analyze the variances, and typically management will really focus in on only the biggest variances. You don't want to micromanage, you don't have time. So you look at the biggest swings in your budget against the actual, and what's causing this, and then what is it that we need to correct. So again, it comes down to price variance and quantity variance, P and Q. So the standard is what should have been used, and then what was the actual output. That's the two. That's the comparison between what was budgeted and what was the actual results. And you will get both. You will get what was the price and quantity for each one, for your your material, your labor, and then your overhead. And it's always going to be both. So it's going to have 6 variables here, as you can see. Again, just another variation of what it's doing here. So they're going to give you some examples, again, it'll always come down to P and Q. The price is, this much per pound, and then we expect to be using this much. It's going to go from one example to another on this. I don't want to beat this up. I think you can read this in greater detail. But it's always going to come down to price variance and quantity variance. And you want to separate that. You just don't want to look at variance just on a total basis. You want to look at each one, because if it's price variance, maybe you need to get your buyer to start being more aggressive on buying it. Or if it's the labor is not being efficient, maybe you're better off paying better but get a higher rate but getting a better employee. So you want to separate this, because this gives you more detail to evaluate from a management standpoint. Whereas total, you wouldn't know which one to correct. So that's why they break it out in greater detail. And then it gets, again, people are going to avoid it, and so you want to break it down as much as numbers as it is, because is it the employee, is it the purchasing manager, who are you blaming here? So labor costs, again, it's going to be always price over quantity. And they're just going to give you a variety of examples here. Labor costs, maybe you are better paid a higher rate because these guys take less time versus maybe low skill and so forth. So this is some of the management decisions that you have to take. Do you take maybe a union worker versus someone that's just starting out, as an example? And look at these efficiency variances. Are we using poor materials? Maybe we need to pay for better materials, or maybe our equipment. And so you're trying to get as much detail for evaluation, because this tells you how management should take corrective action. I'm going to stop here And we'll start in this chapter, the next video on this slide.